it'll be kind of a fun exercise to see, like, this is a React project that's been built by somebody. It's out in the world, and you get to take a look at what other people are doing, what other React devs are doing. So that'll be really cool. We're going to be covering Lifecycle hooks today and talking about the life cycle of a component. So we'll go ahead and jump right into that. Let me share my screen here. Okay, life cycles. Whoa, everything's huge. There we go. That's a little better. All right, so today we're going to talk about the 3 phases of a React component life cycle. So we'll get into those. We'll talk about specifically the constructor, the render method, and the component mount function. And then I'm also going to talk quite a bit about a 4th function called component did update. So we're going to talk about all of those and see examples of all of those. In your project today, jump to day 2 README, and this is the instructions for today's work on the InstaClone project. So there's a focus section that talks about what we're applying today from what we're learning, and that's specifically using component did mount to set your data to state. There's some setup stuff here, so you should be, all of these points are talking about where you should be when you start today. So where you got to from yesterday, you should be at this point here. And then for the project, this describes what you're going to be doing, and then this is your tasks for today. And then, of course, some stretch problems that you can jump into if you'd like to do that. So for your tasks, there's one bullet point concerning the component lifecycle methods. Of course, you're already using the constructor, you're already using render, so those are things that have already been implemented. We're just going to talk about how they work in the flow of a component's lifecycle. And then you're actually going to write the component did mount function for your component. Then the rest of the work today, as we talked about yesterday, is just rehashing everything you've done so far. So all the logic that goes into setting state, you're going to be adding comments, setting the functionality for liking a post, and setting up the search functionality. So all of this is just more and more practice on getting a React application, bringing it to life, letting your user click on things, and having the UI update and your data update based on that user interaction. So awesome, let's go ahead and jump into it. So React lifecycles. Who can tell me what a React lifecycle is? What is the lifecycle? What can we compare this to? My shirt. I'll show you at the end of the lesson. Okay, some good stuff coming in. The birth, growth, and death of a component. I love it, yes. Start to render to, and I would even continue that to being unmounted or the death of a lifecycle. When it gets cruelly ripped out of the UI and it dies. Yes, the circle of life. Thank you, Eli. Good to see you in here, man. Okay, let me pull something up real quick and we can take a look at all of this. Let's see. Oh, that's huge. Okay, this is the one we want to look at. Okay, yeah, I love all of this stuff. So let's take a look at how this works. And I really like the comparison to the circle of life. So what we were talking about with the birth, growth, death, etc., all those things. So those are compared to mount, render, and unmount. When a component is rendered, very first rendered onto the screen, we call that being mounted onto the UI. So React is taking your component and mounting it as a brand new node in the DOM. And that is the birth of our component. Then through the growth or even the life of your component, you are rendering and re-rendering and re-rendering and updating and re-rendering and re-rendering and updating and re-rendering your component over and over again. And then finally, when the component is no longer needed on the DOM, it is unmounted, pulled off of the DOM, aka RIP, our component. So let's take a look at this. This is the diagram that we see here in Training Kit that goes over these three stages. Let me see if we can zoom in a little bit right there. So the three phases that we are, well, so there's these phases down on the side, but then there's these three kind of main phases of our component lifecycle. So we want to focus, we want to be thinking about when we have a React application, we want to be thinking about what's happening during the mounting phase, what's going on in this column, how do we write code that affects this column here. After the component has been mounted to the screen and all of these different functions and operations have run, then we kind of go into this state of limbo where our component is waiting for new props to come in or waiting for us to change our state in our component or for force update to be called. Let me pull up my annotate here. And ooh, this is a chance for me to use my new Wacom tablet. This is going to be fun. Okay. So this is not something we're going to be using and talking about. And I'll show you why in just a minute, but don't worry about this one. What we want to focus on is set state. Ah, man, I need to get used to this thing. And new props. So when either of these situations happen, we're going to go through this whole flow running. I'm bad at this. We're going to go through this whole flow running through all these functions again. And then finally, we get to our unmounting phase here. Okay, so let's talk about each of these. We're going to kind of take these each individually at a time. So we'll start with mounting. When our component mounts, we first run the constructor function. Now this function is run only one time. This isn't ever going to run again. Constructor runs, it sets up our data, and that's it. So who can tell me what the purpose of the constructor function is? What do we use the constructor function for? Okay, good. It creates a new class instance. Oh yeah, setting up our initial state. It initializes our state. Good. Defines the attributes of the class. I like it. We run super, so it also gives us a lot of the functions from that React.component class that we use. Takes in props. Helps us define the database and functionality. Good, yeah, these are all really good. There's a couple things that we're missing, so let's take a look at what those are. Let's see, now let's go ahead and go to what's really cool about this diagram is you can click on stuff. and it takes you right to the docs for it. It's really awesome. So there's that diagram. Okay, so let's take a look at constructor. So there's a couple purposes for the constructor function. First is to initialize local state by assigning an object to this dot state. Let's pull up our Pokemon sandbox from yesterday. So this is the one we were working in yesterday. We're going to be working on this to start for today. So there's that. So let's take a look at our app.js. Here's our constructor. We are initializing data on set state. So initialize state object. Okay, so initializing local state by assigning an object to this dot set state. Inside constructor, you can also bind event handler methods to an instance. So if we wanted to do something like, if we wanted to listen to the window resizing, so every time you, oh, that's not the one at all. I want that one. If you wanted to listen to your browser window being resized like this, you would have to initialize that inside. You can bind that to, oh, let's see, no, that's going to happen in component now. Sorry. Rewind, step back. We're going to bind event handler methods to an instance. So what this is if we have like a handle changes function, for example, with an input, well, we've always written these functions as arrow functions, right? The reason that we're doing this, does anybody know why we write these as arrow functions rather than what I just showed right here? I don't expect many people to know this, so if you don't know this, that's totally fine. Yeah, the this keyword. Perfect, yep. So if we have an arrow function like this, then the this keyword is automatically, we can do something like this dot set state without, we can reference the this keyword inside this function without any extra setup. However, if you don't use an arrow function, then you actually have to take this method and you have to bind the this keyword to this method. So that can happen here inside the constructor. We would say something like this dot handle changes equals this dot handle changes dot bind this. Now, there's some pretty complex things happening here that we don't really need to get into what is going on, because most people in the industry are just moving towards arrow functions for property methods, for class methods. So if you do this, if you keep following this pattern, you're going to be doing what the industry is moving towards, and we don't need to bind anything in our constructor. But I do want you will see this out in the wild. You will see this pattern here. The reason for this is if we have this situation here. So I want you to be aware of what this is and why it's in the constructor so it can handle this situation. However, you're totally fine to continue using arrow functions. I think most of the industry has moved, most reactives have moved to this pattern right here. Okay, so don't let that confuse you, keep using arrow functions, just recognize if you don't use arrow functions inside your constructor, you can bind event handler methods to this keyword. However, if you use arrow functions, you don't have to worry about binding anything here. So we'll leave a note in here. Bind event handler methods to this. And this is just an instance of our class. Okay, any questions on the constructor before we move on to the next one? Okay, don't mean to get into what weeds here, but if you're initializing and managing local state with constructor, how do we manage global state? Hey, that's a really great question. So what do you mean by global state? So this data here is available to this class and can be accessed by this dot state, right? Or I guess we can look down here, this dot state dot Pokemon. So we've got the state property on this class is accessible within this class. And then we take the value of this dot state dot Pokemon and we pass that array down to this component. And so this component receives that data via props. So what do you mean by global state? You can ask, you can clarify that if you want to a little bit, but yeah, Redux is a way to manage global state. There's also another really good system called Context. You can use the Context API to kind of achieve similar things. Okay, awesome. So that is our first component lifecycle method. So when a component mounts, the very first thing that happens is our constructor is invoked. So I'll go ahead and start my live session now. I have to save everything. Here is the live link, because we're just going to hang out in this app for a little bit. So what I want to do is we're going to console log everything along the way here. And just so we can see these lifecycle methods happening, when they get called, how often they get called, in what order they get called. So we're going to pay really close attention to these console logs. So I'm going to say constructor running. So let's take a look in our console. And there we go. Constructor running, yay. All right, so our next thing that happens are a couple of these methods here. We're not going to worry about get derived state from props. We're going to jump right down to render. In fact, to keep this less confusing, notice how I've checked this box up here, show less common life cycles. If I uncheck this, it clears up a lot of the clutter, and these are really what we're concerned about. These are the methods that we deal with on a day-to-day basis as React developers. These less common ones, like should component update, get derived state from props, you don't really deal with those very often. There are some cases that you would want to use these component methods, but for today, to keep everything a lot less confusing, we're just going to worry about these ones right here. So the constructor runs, then the render function runs. So what do you think the purpose of the render function is? Yeah, perfect. The whole purpose of the render function is to Render things, yay! It's inherent in its title. We're displaying content. We're updating the virtual DOM, which will update the actual DOM. Setting the view, displaying things. Puts things on the screen. Yep, to tell React to make changes to the DOM. Perfect. So we're going to be rendering things here. So one thing to note is the render method is the only required method in a class component. You have, when you build a class component, it has to have a render method. Let's see. So yep, doesn't really go into too much that we want to cover here, but these are great docs to go over and understand a few of these things. For example, render function should be pure, meaning inside our render function, we don't modify component state. We do that inside event handler methods or other lifecycle methods. So let's go to our app here. The purpose of the render function is to render things, yay. It's like they were thinking about this as they named this function. So let's go ahead and console log. Let's see when this render function runs. Render function, or we'll just say rendering component. And then let's jump into here, just get rid of this console log for now. Okay, so in our console, we see that our constructor was run first, and then we rendered the component. Now let's go look at this, and these are both functions that we've used many times. Let's go look at this new function that we haven't seen yet. This is just an operation. This is something that happens under the hood. That's why it's yellow here. The blue and the green ones are what we're focused on for today. So let's take a look at component did mount. Without looking here, can you tell me what we use component did mount for? And let's see if there's someone that hasn't answered yet that can answer this question. Nice, couple people writing, thank you. Or typing. Several people typing, I love it. Ooh, nice, post render action, good. Yeah, it happens, it's gonna be after we render something, after we get something onto the DOM, there's often some operations that we want to run. So post render, what are some things that we have to run before we jump into this updating phase? Love it, yeah, post render action. And one of those things is often async data loading. Perfect, thank you very much. Resetting state, yeah, 10 points for both of your Gryffindor, no, not Gryffindor houses, Hogwarts houses of choice. Hopefully it's Gryffindor. So yeah, inside component did mount, we run any operation that we want to run every single time our component is on the screen. For example, getting our initial data from a database. Now you might think, why aren't we doing this in constructor? Why would we not fetch our data before we render something to the screen? And that's a really valid question. I think what we have to recognize is if we waited to render something to the screen, if we waited until we had all our data from a database before we ran this render function, we would actually be giving our users kind of a bad user experience. And let me explain why. So when we make a request from our browser, from our computer, to a database, that's going to take a period of time. Now, most of our users are going to have fast internet, they're going to have fast computers, so they're going to see data very quickly. I mean, that period of time might be 200 milliseconds, and our users' brains won't even recognize that there was a delay in our data and getting our data. But what if some of our users have kind of slower internet speed and it takes 2 seconds to fetch data? If we waited to render anything on the screen until we had all of our data, then those users who are waiting 2 seconds, 3 seconds for that data to come up, they're going to go to our application and they would just sit there with a blank screen and for 2 seconds. Now that doesn't, when you say it out loud, it doesn't seem like a very long time. Like it doesn't seem like that would be a bad experience. But what data has shown is when a user has to wait that long to get any kind of feedback as to what's happening, they leave your application. They're gone. They don't like it. That's too slow for our data-driven, speed-driven world today. So the reason why we run render first before we fetch our initial data is we check what was set in state. We check to see if we have our data yet. If we don't, we're going to render a loading message or a spinner. We're going to inform our users in some way that, hey, hang on a second, we're just fetching data, we'll be right back with our data. And then we go fetch our data. So it's important to give some kind of visual feedback to tell our users, don't worry, it's coming, hang tight, because as long as they see that little spinner, they have confidence that data is going to come back and they're going to see the software, they're going to see the content they came to see. If there's no indication, if there's no indicator, if they just sit there looking at a blank screen, we lose users very quickly. It'd be a bad user experience. And I can demonstrate this with Facebook. So if I go to the Performance tab here, I can tell my browser to pretend it has slow internet speed. I'm going to go to Network, go to Fast 3G. I'm going to go to the Facebook Marketplace. And let's see what kind of visual feedback Facebook gives us that they're loading data. So we've got a spinner, we've got this kind of sidebar thing happening. We just sit here and wait. Okay, now we've got like skeleton stuff going on here. So they've built like the skeleton. Now we've got data showing up even if the pictures haven't loaded. So during this entire process, they were giving us visual feedback saying, hey, hang tight, data's coming, don't leave us. Let's watch it one more time. So I just want you to watch the different ways that they give us feedback that they're fetching data. Now imagine if it had taken that long to load everything, if you had just sat there looking at a blank screen. How often would you be clicking that refresh button? How quickly would you jump to that corner and refresh, refresh? Why isn't the page coming up? It's because we're so used to having that feedback that data is loading that if we wait to render something to the screen until all of our data is back, then we lose our users. We give our users a bad experience. So how do we write component did mount? We're going to come in here, and these three lifecycle methods in green, component did mount, component did update, component will unmount, are usually found right after the constructor. So if we have like a handle changes or some other function here, our other component lifecycle methods are going to be right below the constructor. So we're going to come here, we're going to say component did mount. I want you to add this to your Pokemon app from yesterday. We're going to say that this is post render. What did we say here? Let's see. Post-render actions, I love it. Post-render actions like fetching data. Okay, so once you add component mount, you'll notice that it's not an arrow function. You can write this as an arrow function. Most people just write it like this. This keyword is already bound to these lifecycle methods. So you don't have to worry about the situation we discussed before. All right, so first, let's just console log when this is running. So we're going to say component mount, and it's often abbreviated to CDM. Component mount running. And let's do little runner gal here. Okay, so there we go. First thing that happened is the constructor ran. Then the render function was invoked and it rendered our component. And then our component mount ran. Now, there's not really a good use case right in this particular app for component mount because we don't need to do any post-render actions. We're importing our data from a file here inside our project. So we can just mount it, we can just initialize our state, our data onto state right away because we have it accessible. But let's pretend that we are fetching this data from a database. What I want you to do is delete data from Pokemon here and just add an empty array. Then inside component mount, we're going to say mock data fetch. And first, let's just run this.setState. And we're going to set our state for Pokemon. And we're going to say, we're going to set our data to the Pokemon state property. So this is a very normal flow in a React application. And we're going to see this a lot more next week when we learn about actually fetching the data. But normally what you see is our state object is initialized with an empty array. And then we run a data fetch inside component mount. When the data comes back, we set our state with that data. So real quick, inside our render function, when our render function runs, what does our state look like? Let's take a look here. We're going to say, we're going to console log this.state.Pokemon. Save, why isn't it saving? Oh man, Code Sandbox has been killing me lately. Okay, so what do you notice here? Inside our render function, we're now console logging this.state.Pokemon. So what do you notice now about our console that is kind of interesting? What do you see over here? Oh yeah. Okay, number one, first thing to notice, our render ran twice. Check that out. So we've got rendering component right here after constructor, But then we ran it again. Nice, good eye. And as you can see, I'll let you guys finish typing. I'm too excited. I just want to give you all the answers. Oh, good observation. Yes. Set state makes render run again. Yeah, perfect. We're setting state inside component did mount. And so let's take a look at our diagram real quick. So we're here. We're right here. Hey, I was supposed to draw. Inside component did mount. And inside component did mount, we run set state. And that's pretty normal because we fetched our data, and when our data gets back, we want to put it on the state property, right? Well, take a look at this. Whenever we run set state, we're going to rerun render. Our render function gets invoked every single time we run set state. And that's exactly what's happening here in our application. Inside component did mount runs, we run set state, or as soon as component did mount runs, we jump up into our updating phase. And then we run set state, which re-renders our component. And you can see the first time that render happened, this .state.pokemon was an empty array. But the second time, after component did mount runs, it's an array of our Pokemon. I want to show you one thing, and then we'll let's go ahead and take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll handle this delay here as if we were fetching data from an API. So we'll actually put a spinner on our screen to indicate that we're loading data, and we'll mock a real data fetch. Okay, so I'll see you back in 5 minutes. Okay, we had a couple good questions come in that I want to address real quick. So let's take a look at those. This is a really great question. So when working with large databases, is there a way to control how much is rendered to the screen at a time? For example, let's say I only want 10 Pokemon to load at once. Then if the user wants to see more, they can click View More, and another 10 Pokemon will load. This is a perfect answer. So yeah, this is called pagination, and it can be, you can handle this in the database or in the browser on the client end. So on the client side, you could, if you handle pagination on the client side, you could load all 150, 160 Pokemon into the browser, set it on state, and then only look at 10 at a time. So you would use JavaScript and functions to determine which page you're looking at, and if you're looking on page 6, which set of 10 Pokemon should you display. The other way to handle it is on the back end. So you can build your server in such a way that the browser makes a request for page 2, and it only sends back 10 Pokemon at a time, depending on which page request you're getting. So yeah, really great question. Pagination is challenging to think through the logic, but really fun exercise you can do to learn JavaScript a little bit better. So if you want, I would encourage you to take this Pokemon project and build out a pagination system. See how far you can get with something like that. Okay, the other question is down here. So CDM runs only after the first render. Yes, that is correct. So when we see this, you'll notice that render spans both mounting and updating phases here. And constructor and component mount are only in the mounting phase. So both of these functions run one time and one time only. So never during the life cycle of a component will you see constructor run multiple times or component mount. So where do we set state? Where do we make changes to our UI if we receive new props or if we run set state? Where do we look at those things and make sure that our users are getting good experience? That is in component did update. So we'll take a look at that in just a second. Let's finish taking a look at component did mount, and we'll set up our spinner situation and mock a data call here. So data calls are pretty simple to mock. We just need to use set timeout. So we're going to run set timeout, and this is a function that takes in a callback function. And then inside, this actually takes in 2 arguments. So the first is the callback function. The second argument, if we collapse that again, the second argument is an amount of time that we want to wait before we run this callback function. So let's wait 2 seconds. By the way, the amount of time is in milliseconds. So 2,000 milliseconds is 2 seconds. So to mock a data fetch that takes 2 seconds, we're going to put set state inside the callback function here. Oops, I pushed copy on the blank line. There we go. So now we're going to wait for 2 seconds before we set our Pokemon state. So that means for 2 seconds, let's pull this up in another browser window. Okay, so we saw 1,000. Hey, why is that happening? That should not be happening. Oh, nope, why is this happening? Let's do this. I think I know what's going on. inside Pokemon, we're displaying this class, which is the yellow background, even if we don't have data. So no, let's see. I think this might be another code sandbox issue. There we go. Now we're waiting. Okay. So we do this, we wait, we wait, we wait, and then we get our data and display things to the screen. So while we're waiting, what we're going to do is we're going to come here to our Pokemon component. We're receiving props. We're going to do a check. We're going to say if props.pokemon.length is 0, we're going to return our spinner. Otherwise, we're going to return all of this. So while we have no data, we're going to return one thing. If we have data, we're going to return something else. Now, a shortcut to this is, since this is hitting a return, and inside a function, once you hit a return, nothing below that line will be evaluated anymore. We actually don't even need an else block. So we can say, if we have no data, return this. And then this is kind of an implied else because of this return here. So this is how we're going to set this up. We'll just do one if block. If we have data, then we'll just jump down to here. Okay, so now the fun part. Let's pull up React Loader Spinner. This is my favorite spinner that I've found so far. Just the easiest to use, I guess. So let's go take a look at the example. Here we go, view in page. Okay, so I'll drop this for you. I don't know why I did that in code. There. There's that link. And you can kind of play around with whatever you want and just load a spinner. I'm going to do the airplane. So let's see. I thought there was a way that I thought this gave us the code for this. Maybe not. That's okay. I know I want the plane, so I'm going to go back to this NPM page, which I will also drop in here. And I'm going to find the plane. Oh, wow, they don't even list it here. But that's okay. We can just we can change the type to plane. All right, so let's do this. Tailspin. So what we need to do is we need to add React Loader Spinner as a dependency. We need to import loader from that package. And then we're going to, loader is a component, just a normal React component that we can display just like this, just like any other component that we display. So step 1, add dependency, React Loader Spinner. So go ahead and add React Loader Spinner as a dependency. Then we're going to come up here under prop types. We're going to say import loader from React Loader Spinner. Then we go to the documentation, and we just grab this block here. So I'll post that. Great question. How would we add this dependency in Visual Studio Code or whatever editor you're using? It's just this right here, either yarn add or npm install React loader spinner. So that's how you add, just yarn add React loader spinner. If you're using npm, do -- save, so it saves to the package.json file. Yeah, good question. Okay, so then we take that component that we found, and we wanted to run plain, right? So let's go ahead and run this. Let's run it. What is going on? Okay, I reverted back to not having set timeout, apparently. So weird. Ah. Okay, there we go. Hey, there's my spinner. Perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. Loading up data. And there's my data. So this is exactly why we want render to run right away, right after our constructor. Then we fetch our data, then we set our state, then we re-render, and then we just wait until one of these other actions happen. Real quick, let's touch on component will unmount, and then after our next break, we'll come back and go over component did update, and we'll build an application with this. I'm going to see if there are, oh, sorry. There you go. My bad. Oh, yeah. So anytime you run like yarn add, you're adding dependencies, or it's on the same, it's wherever your package.json is. So if I pull up my terminal here, and remember the Dumbo project we made yesterday with create React app, if I ls, I can see package.json right here. So let me try, just pull it up like this. All right, so here's Dumbo. I want to be on whatever folder package.json is for my React app. That's where I'm going to add dependencies. So let's pull up package.json and pull up my terminal. And I'm going to say yarn add React loader spinner. It's going to go through adding that package, all of that package's dependencies, and then I come back to package.json and I see that that's been added to my package.json. So it needs to be, again, it needs to be anywhere that, wherever my package.json for my React app is. So there we go. So you just type in ls and make sure that you see package.json here. This is also the same spot that you run yarn start or yarn test. It's where you're going to run pretty much all of your yarn commands is in the same spot in your terminal. Let's see. Yeah, I will save my Save this here. Okay, we kept our set timeout this time. So you can jump onto my link and fork from this project if it's not working for you. All right, let's see. Same place you run yarn start, yarn install. Yeah, perfect. Can we mix and match yarn and npm in a project? No. You want to choose one and stick with it through the whole thing. Okay, good question here. So the first render just gets something on the page until data shows up. So are there always at least 2 renders? Pretty much. If you have a data fetch call that you're going to make when a component mounts, you're going to have 2 renders. And that's just fine. Think about a situation where you have an input. And the way that we've built inputs, we've built controlled inputs, that every single time someone types on their keyboard, it's going to run set state, right? Every keystroke is running the handle changes function, updating state. So for every single keystroke, we're running render again. Now, at first glance, you're probably thinking, oh, that sounds really inefficient and sounds like it's going to really hurt performance. But you have to remember that just because we're running render and we say we're re-rendering our component doesn't mean that the entire component on the page is going to be repainted in the DOM. Okay, there's a difference between repainting the entire component on a DOM and re-rendering a component in React. So yes, in React, the component gets re-rendered, that function gets rerun, but that happens on the virtual DOM. And the virtual DOM is way more performant than the actual DOM. So the changes happen in the virtual DOM, it gets compared to the actual DOM, and then only those tiny little nodes that need to be updated are updated. So it's okay that render is run over and over and over again, because React is doing the work to compare the virtual DOM to the actual DOM and make sure that the actual DOM is only repainting the DOM nodes that need to be repainted. Awesome. So would there be any problems working with less in React? It would make CSS much easier. Yeah, absolutely. There's no issues there. In fact, out of the box now, this is new as of about 6 months ago, you can use Sass. So this project actually uses styles.scss, which is a preprocessor, and which means that this image inside here is nested inside our Pokemon class. This, if you were using less, you have to do a little bit more setup, but it would be pretty much that for less, right? So you can absolutely use preprocessors. And if you know less, you pretty much know Sass. Most people in the industry use Sass because it's just there out of the box when you use Create React App. So I think that'd be a good one to learn. Okay, let's see. So we just use component did mount if and when we need to fetch data. Yes, that's the first use case. The second use case for component did mount would be if we need to, any other post-render actions we need to run. So fetching data, kind of the 2 big use cases for this are fetching data or my mind went blank. Come on, someone help me here. Event handlers, there we go. Not event handlers, event listeners. Yes, event listeners. Okay, sorry for the brain fart. So, for example, if we wanted to go window.end add event listener, and we wanted to listen for the resize event, and then run a function every time the window resizes. You do that here, you add the event listener inside component did mount. But if we ever do this, you absolutely need to clean up this event listener, and that happens in component will unmount. Remove event listener like that. So you have to do both. And that brings us to the purpose of will unmount. Clean up event listeners / subscriptions. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to check Slack. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll talk about what this is, why we have to clean up things here. But let me look at Slack first, see where we're at with questions. Let's see. So we just answered that. So change to the virtual DOM. Is it full DOM rewrite? But it's nice and quick. No. Change to the virtual DOM means that there's actually a good way to... I've got a good chart to show this somewhere. Hold on, let me find this real quick. Actually, I'll find that during our break and we'll come back to this so we don't waste time with me looking stuff up. I see on some frameworks that they define the styles as a const in the component file. Is this common or useful in any way? Yeah, so you can do something like const app styles equals, we'll say a background color. So notice the difference here than what you would see in CSS. We'll just say blue. Then we could do styles equals this object, or where we've captured it here, app styles. And then, okay, this is really driving me crazy. I've never had this many problems with Code Sandbox. I bet we see a fix come out pretty quick for this. Okay, so background color. Maybe let's just try background. I don't know, but this is what you would do. I don't know why things aren't working right now. But yeah, this is totally fine. The advantage to this is, number one, you're not going to have leaking styles. And number two, the styles for this component are right here in this file. So you don't have to jump back and forth between files just to add styling. Personally, I still like separating it out into its own file. But this is something that's becoming more and more popular, and maybe someday I'll be forced to follow this kind of convention, but I will fight it to the bitter end. Haha. All right, last couple questions. If you need to run last SAS compiler and Yarn at the same time, do you just use 2 instances of your console? Yep. You can set it up. So again, SAS comes with your app out of the box, so you don't need to run anything for SAS. I have no idea what it takes to run less because I've always done SAS. So I'm sure there are ways to set it up so you don't have to run 2 terminals just to run your less compiler. So yeah, you'll have to check that out with create React app. Just do a Google search, create React app, use less. if I have a set state run inside the component did mount, would that create an infinite loop? Ooh, good question. That's actually exactly what we're doing right here. Component did mount, this dot set state, and we're okay. So it does not. You can get in a little bit of trouble with this, but it would be more for component did update, where you could get into this loop, infinite loop here. So that can be an issue, but there are warnings that React gives you in the console if that's happening, if it detects that that is a possibility. Okay, let's take a break. Great questions. I will see you back in 5 minutes. Okay, here we go. We have talked about a lot of things so far, and we're going to kind of wrap up with componented update. So I just want to do a quick review over what we've talked about. But first, I want to kind of take a step back and think about why this is important. So you've come, and this is I'm gonna go way back. I'm gonna take a huge step back. You've come to Lambda to learn how to be a programmer. Well, what is the end purpose of that? Of course, it's to get into this career, be able to take care of your family, be able to help other people, give back back to the world, help those in need. But from like what you'll be doing every single day is you'll be building software that people are going to be using. And hopefully you get into something that you feel like really fulfills you, that you are making a difference in the world. Whatever your goals are as far as the products you'll be working on, I hope you get to that point. Not every single job is going to be that way. My first job as a programmer was working for sendoutcards.com, where someone could get on, write up a like a gift card type, not a gift card, but a physical card on our software, and then we would print it out and mail it out. So it's like not the most exciting thing in the world, but the programming and the work behind it was really cool. So what I'm trying to say is you're going to be building software for people to use. Now, as a programmer, it's our job with the UX designer to come up with a way to make that experience that our users are having a really good experience. Okay, so we want to, and for example, this situation that we talked about at the very beginning, where we're fetching data, so we want to give our user an indication that we're loading data, and they're not just sitting there staring at a blank screen. So when you're building software, I want you to be thinking about all the different ways that that we can make a good experience for our users. In order to do that, we need to understand every step of this lifecycle process. We need to understand that we're going to run our render function before we ever fetch our data. We need to understand that every time we run set state, render is going to run again, component.update update is going to run again. We have an opportunity to hook into these functions and change the UI based on new prompts, or change the UI based on new state. Okay, so the reason that we're studying this, and the reason these concepts are important, are because these are the functions that we have available to us to provide a good experience for our users. So I just want to give you that kind of high-level overview of component lifecycles and why this stuff is important. Okay, so what we've talked about so far, we talked about the constructor. The purpose of the constructor is to initialize data and perhaps bind methods that aren't bound to this yet. Render obviously renders things to the screen. Component mount will run one time after the initial render. This is where we can make our initial data fetch calls. This is where we can set up event listeners or subscriptions and make sure that those are set up before we get into the quote unquote life of our component. Inside this updating phase, every time a component receives new props, it's going to re-render. Every time we run set state, it's going to re-render. And we can actually see that in action here if we go into, look at Pokemon here. Pokemon is receiving props, right? So let's go into Pokemon, and let's do a console.log. And let's say receiving props, re-rendering. Let's see where this gets run. So constructor running, we render our component and we pass an empty array down to Pokemon. So Pokemon receive props. So it re-renders. This component re-renders. Then component did mount runs and re-rendering happens again, this time with our data. So we received props again. So this component re-renders. And because this component re-renders, that's how we switch from this, from rendering our loader, to our Pokemon list. Because this function runs again. Okay, now we get to the question of when we re-render something, what's happening right here? What's happening to the DOM and to the virtual DOM? So to understand that, we have to understand the what's called the reconciliation process. This is the reconciliation process. Let's zoom in on this a little bit. Okay, so we've got our DOM. This is what's being rendered to the screen. When an event is triggered, or new data comes in, or a set state happens, and a re-render happens inside our app, the virtual DOM changes. Then there's a diffing algorithm to compare the previous created component with the new one. And then the DOM is reconciliated with changes on the virtual DOM. So that's the process. Here's a really good look at what's happening. So our model here, this is the code. This is our data model inside our application. This is the virtual DOM. And this is the actual DOM. So we're looking at the component tree inside the virtual DOM. And we say this piece of data changed, which changed this component in our component tree. So we're going to compare. Now this data, we'll say that this data is stored in this component up here. This is keeping control of state and passing everything down as props. So when this piece of data, all of this is stored up here, when this single piece of data changes, props in every single one of these components change. But the data is only used right here. So React knows that this is the only component that really needs to be updated on the DOM. It finds that where the difference is, and it only updates that one node on the DOM. So even though all of these components technically were re-rendered, the render function runs in every single component here in the entire tree, only one is actually updated on the DOM. Okay, so that's the process. When we're storing our state higher up and everything is re-rendering, the DOM is not repainting every single DOM node. It's really, really good at finding the difference and patching, doing a patch or a single update on a single node. So hopefully that helps that question that came up earlier about the virtual DOM. I'll send this picture to you all as well. Okay, last question, and then we'll get into component did update. So are we just handling the first render in an empty array for example purposes, or is this structure something we'll use in real life? Yeah, this is something that we will use all the time, because most of the time we're going to get Pokemon data from a database, right? So when we initialize our app component, we haven't received this yet. It's still coming from a database. So we initialize it as an empty array. We make a data fetch. Right now we're just making a data fetch that takes 2 seconds. So we make a data fetch. When that data comes back, then we populate this empty array. So this is a pattern that you'll use day in and day out with regular components. Great question. Thank you for asking that. That'll help clarify that with a lot of people. And yes, Luis, this is exactly why we don't see the entire page reload, because the whole page is not reloading. You're only updating exactly what needs to be updated on the DOM. Whew, okay, we're almost done. This is a lot of talk and a lot of theory. Let's take a look at this happening in the real world. So we're going to open up a real life example here. Let's see. We're going to open up this earthquake mapper application. This is made by Matthew Thorey. I have no idea who this person is. I just found this. It's a really cool app with some cool data. So we're going to take a look at the UI. We're going to take a look at the code behind this and see how another React developer is building their project. So minimum magnitude 3.0. Let's see if there's any. Well, let's just deal with date range only for now. So we're going to say what earthquakes have happened from yesterday to today. And I'm going to submit this. And those are all the earthquakes that have happened in the last 24 hours. So pretty cool set of data here. You can click on stuff, exit this out. This was a magnitude 3.0 or 3.4, kind of cool. Alaska. Here, let me give you this project, because it's a good one. That's awesome. Okay, so that's what this application does. You can pick something here. These dates are stored in state. This data that's coming for this map is being fetched from an open API. So this is an API that after next week you'll be able to use as well, and you can make your own earthquake mapper. When we click submit, I want you to notice that, let's go back one more day. I want you to notice what happens to the map. So the whole map reloads, and then we bring in new data. So let's go check out how this is working. Let's go see the code behind that map flicker. Like, what's making that map reload? Where is this data coming from? Where is it stored? And you're going to be surprised at how much you recognize what's happening under the hood here. So this will be really cool. All right, so index.js, we have React DOM rendering. Perfect, we're getting app from app. Let's go check out app. Okay, what do you notice about app? Talk to me about app. What do you see here in app.js? Router, we're going to learn about router next week, not tomorrow, next week. Yeah, we've got one container, no constructor, so this technically could just be a functional component, right? Good observations. What are we rendering? Yeah, earthquakes container. We're rendering a component. So this is coming from our components file. Let's go check out earthquakes container. So inside our components file, we check out earthquakes container. Oh, a whole bunch more happening here. Okay, a quick pro tip from Dustin is, oh yeah, good point there too. We're not passing props to earthquake container. Earthquake container does have its own state. And look at that, it's initializing state as an empty array. By the way, this is not wrapped inside a constructor. This is valid syntax. So you don't technically need to wrap state inside a constructor. If you have a constructor, it has to be inside the constructor. But technically, you don't need a constructor. You can do this. Okay, pro tip from Dustin. When I go into someone else's code and I'm trying to figure out what a component is doing, the first thing I do is go down to the render function. So I don't know, I can't look at this and see and really tell what's going on until I look at the render function and what data is being rendered here. So if I look at the render function, down at the bottom, I can see that we have just these links and this text here. That's fine, I don't really care about those. What I care about looks like this div right here, right? So we've got the H1 right there. That div in the middle is going to be my map and my whole filter section here. Okay, so earthquakes form on filter. Looks like earthquakes form is receiving a callback function called onFilter, and it's going to run this function here. So when we run that function, we're going to set our state for our earthquakes with whatever this is whatever is happening. Oh, look at this. So we're actually running search quakes. So what is search quakes? Search quakes is coming from services. So this is the API call. Okay, so we're actually making, when we click the submit button here, actually it's probably this one, maybe? Yeah, so when we click the submit button, we are making an API call, and we're setting state with the data that comes back from that API call. So where is quakes being used? Well, let's go back to our render function. So we've got the filter, then we've got this thing happening here. So we're rendering earthquakes map, and here we're passing down quakes. So the data that we're setting by running that filter function is being passed into earthquake map as quakes. So let's go take a look at earthquakes map. All right, so this has a render function. This is a little bit weird because we're dealing with Google Maps, which is going to just insert a map where there is a ref here. So the render function is a little bit weird here, not something we're used to, but that's okay. So at first it just says loading map. Then when the map initializes, it's going to grab this div and basically put the map on the div. So let's go up here then, and let's see what's happening in this component. So we've got component did update. Wonder what component did update does. So if we look, we can kind of tell what component did update does by looking at this block right here. So if this is ever run, it's taking in previous props that we had and previous state. And we're looking at some props that are being passed down. We're going to focus on quakes, not so much on the Google one, but let's say that our previous props, our previous earthquake props, is different than our current earthquake props. What happens? What happens when our data for our earthquakes changes? That's all this is saying. If our earthquake data has changed, run this .load map. So load map is going to do exactly what it sounds like. It's going to load our map. In other words, when I click this button here, we fetch earthquake data, we set state for our earthquake data, we pass that down to earthquake's map. Earthquake's map notices that the data for earthquakes has changed, and it will reload the entire map. So when I bring this back to magnitude 3 earthquakes for the last 2 days, the entire map reloads. Or if I change the date to this month, the entire map reloads. Pretty cool stuff, right? Okay, we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to see if there's any questions, and then we'll take a quick break. This is something we're going to talk about next week, so don't worry about that right now. We're going to talk about this next week. But in a thread here, so we're going to call this, let's see, I'll just say thread. In a thread here, I want you to share some emoji with how you feel looking at this as someone else's project and actually having an understanding of what's going on. How does that make you feel? And then we'll come back from lunch. So this is our feelings thread. Did I say lunch? We're going to come back from lunch. We're going to come back from break. See you in 5 minutes. Okay, here we go. Let's wrap this up. Thanks for sharing your feelings, first of all. By the way, I love this one. Thanks, Louise. That's awesome. Cool. So let's, yeah. Let's go into working with all of this stuff in an application here. So we're going to work on, I'm going to stop my live session here. There's the earthquake one. I'm going to start a live session here. So we're going to make a doggos app. This is a fun one. This is a cool API. So there's the live session. Here is the actual sandbox. So jump on here, fork this sandbox, and we'll probably be about 5 to 10 minutes past the hour. Just a heads up as we finish this up. Okay, so let's take a look at what's going on here. We just have everything's done in this one file. All we're displaying is a list of dog images that we're getting back, that we're going to get back from this doggos API. Let's see. Let me bring this one back over here. So as far as the application goes, it's a pretty simple, small application. But we need to write the logic to fetch our doggos, and I'll give you that logic because you don't know how to fetch data yet. But we want to fill out our component did mount with our first fetch. We want to run a component did update for when we type in here and fetch a dog images of a certain dog breed. And we'll talk about what we're going to do inside here. So first of all, we're rendering an input that's being controlled by doggo text. Handle changes is taking care of updating our doggo text, so we can type into here just fine. Our state, you'll notice that the state object is outside of the constructor. So the constructor is being run under the hood. The React library and is taking care of that for us. So that's being run, our render's being run, then our component did mount is being run. So this is where we want to actually fetch our data. So I'm going to give you this code here. Okay, so grab that fetch call, and we're going to just put that right inside component did mount. Yay, we've got doggos. They're so cute. I love huskies. So you'll notice that we are fetching from huskies here. You could put a different breed inside this string, and you'll fetch a different breed of puppies. All right, so that's happening in component did mount. We're fetching data, and you'll notice that we are running set state. Okay, don't worry too much about the fetch syntax and all of that. What I want you to notice is inside component did mount, we are setting state and populating this array here. And then that array is being used in our render function, this .state.doggos, to render a list of images. Okay, so the next thing we want to do then is be able to type into here a dog breed, click fetch doggos, and have it refetch images of dogs and repopulate our page here. So let's find our button. Our button is down here, fetch doggos. And you'll notice that we have a fetch doggos function that is, let's just close this for a second so we can look at this in one line. It's doing the same fetch call here, but instead of hard coding a dog breed in, we're going to use an interpolated string and add whatever text we typed into our input into this call. So if we type in boxer, click the button, we want this to fetch a list of boxer images. And then we're going to take the dogs that we get back, the dog images we get back, and set our state with that data that we received back. Okay, so this one's pretty easy. We just need to run this function on when we click that button. So in the button, we'll do on click equals this dot fetch doggos. Great explanation, quick explanation for what's going on, Luis. Thank you. Cameron, we'll get to see this a little bit more next week, but basically this is the data we receive back from this array, and it happens to be an object, and this dog's object has a message property that is an array of dog images. So we could just do console.log dogs. Oh no, this isn't going to work unless we do that. Okay, so we can look at dogs just briefly to see what is actually being called here. So we've got this wired up now. Oh man. We can run boxer, click on fetch doggos, and you see the image is updated. So if you click on console, the dog's images that we console logged is right here. So this is the dog's object that we console logged. That's basically what was returned from the API, from the database. Message, you can see, is all it is an array of image URLs. So doggos becomes an array of image URLs. And that's how we render all these images here. So good question. Again, this is stuff we're going to be talking about next week. Ooh, here's a good question. Why don't we need to do onClick as an anonymous function? So if at any time you are doing onClick and you don't need to pass anything to this callback function other than the event, you can pass in this function definition here. So fetch doggos only takes in the event. If we wanted to also pass in like the doggo text instead of getting it from state right here, if we just wanted to pass this in, hey, earthquake, what are you doing? If we wanted to do that, and we need to pass in a second argument, that's when we wrap this in an anonymous function. Like that. So that'll accomplish the same thing that we saw earlier. But yeah, if you don't need to pass in any other data, then this works just fine. So let's just set all of this back up to how it was. There we go. Okay, so now let's take a look at this. So when we fetch our data here, when we set state after pushing that button, we're running set state again, right? Which means render is going to run and component did update is going to run. So let's just see what we can do with that. So we're going to come up here to component did update. And we're just going to make sure that this is true. CDU runnings. So so it ran once because we set state inside our component did mount. Now if we fetch boxer doggos, then CDU runnings happens again. There's something weird going on with this running so many times. It shouldn't be, but that's okay. We're not going to worry about that right now. So this is running again because when we click on that button, we're running set state again. So let's do this. I really do not like chihuahuas. Anybody with me? Anybody else? All right, good, good. Got some fellow chihuahua haters. If you like chihuahuas, you're not going to like the rest of this. Feel free to leave my lecture. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to block this app from ever displaying pictures of chihuahuas. So we're going to say if previous state let's see. So we want to check to see if we have fetched new dogs. So we're going to check to see if doggos is different in our previous state than it is in our new current state. So we're going to check doggos. Is it different than our current state right now? If it is, then we want to check to see if this .state.doggo text equals chihuahua. And we're going to do some logic in here. So the whole point of component did update is to look at either our previous props and compare it to our new props we just received, or to look at our previous state as we're doing here and compare it to our current state and then make a change or do something if this check turns out to be truthy. If it is true that these have changed, do something inside here. So if we go from husky to boxer, hey, I'm down. Let's take a look at those dogs. But if we go from anything to chihuahua, we have to make a change. So we're going to say, we're going to refetch. We're going to copy this fetch down here. Actually, let's copy this one. Inside component to mount, copy that one. We're going to refetch dogs, and we're going to fetch huskies. So if someone, for some strange reason, fetched chihuahua, we're going to refetch and change it to huskies. So let's try this out. So we've got huskies, we can do boxers. If we try chihuahua, did I spell it right down here? Yeah. Ha ha! No looking at chihuahuas on my watch. We can go back to boxers. We can do Malinois, Melanese, I think is how you say it. Oh, nope, that doesn't work. We haven't, we're not handling errors very good. So if you type in something wrong, you're gonna have to refresh the page. Okay, so let's do one more thing though to make this a better user experience. Because we don't, if we fetch chihuahuas, it displayed there for a second. That was scary. If we fetch chihuahuas, we want to make sure that our user knows that these are not pictures of chihuahuas. They're actually pictures of huskies. So inside here, not only are we going to set our state with our new huskies, we're also going to set our state, our doggo text, to husky. So let's bring this back up. We fetch boxer, it works fine. We fetch chihuahua, and we switch everything back to huskies. Okay, awesome. Let me pull up Slack and see if we've got any questions. Oh man. Okay, so we answered those. Got a lot of comments on dogs, that's fine. You can't fetch chihuahuas because chihuahuas can't fetch. Yes, yes. I don't know. Okay, sorry, Steve. Glad it's not an issue on my end. Real quick, let's just take a look at the dog breeds you can fetch so you can play around with this a little bit more. If you go here to dog.ceo/dog API, then you can look at the breed list, and these are all the breeds that you can pass in. So lots and lots of dogs that you can pass in here. There is, okay, I just spelled it wrong. Let's do Maltese. Maltese, is that right? Or is that way off? Labrador, we'll just go Labrador. That seems easier. Labrador. There we go. That picture is amazing, by the way. Okay, awesome. That is it for our lecture. Again, the project today is not going to use Lifecycles very much. You're going to use component mount. The main thing you're going to do today is change your posts in your state, whatever you've called your post data, to an empty array, and then in component mount, do something like this.set state posts post data, however you imported that into your file. So that's the big thing for today. We went through quite a bit more than is in the project so that you can see when component.update gets used and be ready for that. Basically just if checks all over the place inside component.update. But other than that, the main part of your afternoon is going to be spent on the functionality of these three different sections here. So the point of this is to like really practice on JavaScript logic and JavaScript functions like .map, .filter, all those things. The more you can learn JavaScript algorithms and JavaScript logic, the better you're going to be as a React developer. So if you feel like that is a weak point for you, if you struggle with that, then I would highly recommend looking up JavaScript katas and doing something, figuring out a kata program you can do every single day. For example, Code Wars is the big one, Code Kata, coderdojo.com. Join one of these programs, start doing these algorithm problems every single day, and you will you'll get a lot better at these logic problems in JavaScript. So I highly encourage you to do that. If you feel like the logic that it's going to take to accomplish these 3 tasks here are tough. If you struggle with this, then this is something that I would highly recommend. Okay. Yeah, I think this is a great point here. My full-time React job was definitely 90% good old-fashioned JavaScript work. Yep, absolutely. All right. Oh, link for the dog API? Wait, I gave you that. Which link are you looking for? Yeah, there's the dog API. Let me know, Chase. Oh, here we go. Awkward pause. Code challenges. Okay. I just looked up JavaScript katas, so I'll send you that link there. There you go. Okay, everybody have a wonderful day, and I will see you back tomorrow.